Nobody prepares you for the moment you realize your wife is rooting for the cancer. Not the doctors. Not the pamphlets they hand you at the treatment center with their careful, optimistic language. Not the counselors who talk about leaning on your support system, as though your support system hasn't already packed up emotionally and started building a life without you. I was 46 years old, sitting in a treatment center in Denver, Colorado, fighting the hardest battle of my life. And the person who was supposed to be in my corner had already left. She just hadn't told me yet. My name is Daniel Kerr. Vanessa and I had been married for 15 years. I loved Vanessa the way good men love, without conditions, without keeping score, without ever once making her feel like she had to earn it. I was her husband in the truest sense of that word. I showed up every day in every way that mattered. I built my entire life around making sure Vanessa Kerr felt chosen every single day. I thought that meant something to her. Turns out it just meant she had more time to make other plans. Looking back now, and I have had a lot of time to look back, I can see the cracks that were always there. Vanessa loved the life I built more than she loved me. She loved the vacations and the car and the way people looked at her when she walked into a room on my arm. She loved what Daniel Kerr provided. Daniel Kerr himself was, I suspect, always optional. What a fool I was. The diagnosis came on a Wednesday morning in October. Multiple myeloma. My oncologist, Dr. Patel, a calm, precise woman who had clearly delivered this sentence 1,000 times and still somehow made it feel personal, walked me through everything with the quiet efficiency of someone building a house in a hurricane. Chemotherapy. 8 cycles. I sat in that chair and I didn't hear half of what she said, because all I could think about was Vanessa. I drove home, walked into her kitchen where she was making dinner, and I told her. Vanessa cried real tears. She held me right there at the kitchen counter in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, and she said, "We're going to fight this together. Daniel, I'm not going anywhere." I believed her. That's almost funny to me now. We had a daughter, Piper, 6 years old, with my eyes and Vanessa's smile. She was the best thing we had ever done together. The one thing in our marriage that was completely, undeniably real. 4 weeks into my diagnosis, Vanessa sat me down and told me she was sending Piper to stay with her mother. She said it made sense. Said the treatment would be hard and a 6-year-old didn't need to see that. Said it was the practical thing to do. I agreed. I thought she was protecting our daughter. She was clearing the house. Exactly 21 days after my diagnosis, Grant showed up in our lives. He was a man Vanessa had met at a wine auction 7 months before the cancer. A contact saved quietly in her phone. A door she had left cracked open and apparently decided now that I was conveniently preoccupied with trying not to die to walk straight through. His name was Grant. His last name is not worth remembering. He was the guy Vanessa apparently found compelling enough to detonate 15 years of marriage for. The changes in Vanessa came the way all the worst things come. Slowly, and then all at once. First, it was the treatment visits. My sessions ran every 4 weeks down at Rocky Mountain Cancer Center. And, in the beginning, Vanessa came. Then she came late. Then she didn't come and texted instead. Stuck at a meeting. "Babe, you got this." Then she stopped texting altogether. Then came the phone. Vanessa had never been precious about her phone before. We were the kind of couple who knew each other's passcodes, who handed phones across the dinner table to share videos. Suddenly her phone was always face down. Suddenly she took it to the bathroom. Suddenly she laughed at things she didn't share. Then came the flinching. I reached for her hand one evening on the couch, and she pulled back just slightly. Just a fraction. The way you pull back from something you no longer want to touch. I noticed every single thing. I was sick. I was not blind. But I want you to understand what chemotherapy does to a person. It is not tiredness. It is something deeper and stranger. A heaviness that lives in your bones and makes even thinking feel like labor. I didn't have the energy to open that conversation, so I filed it away. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself the treatment was making me dark. I was not paranoid. There's a version of this story where I tell you I confronted her the moment I noticed the flinching, the face-down phone, the laugh she no longer shared. That's not what happened. What actually happened is that I spent 3 separate nights lying awake next to her, running through a mental checklist of reasons it might be nothing. She's stressed. She's scared for me and doesn't know how to show it. She's protecting herself from getting too attached to a man who might not make it. And that's a survival instinct, not a betrayal. I built her excuses more carefully than she ever built her lies. I want you to sit with that, because I think a lot of people who end up where I ended up spent months doing exactly what I did, constructing a kinder story than the one actually unfolding in their own house. Because the alternative was too large to hold while also fighting for your life. Dr. Patel noticed before I said a single word about it. Somewhere around my 4th session, she started asking different questions. How was my support system at home? Was I eating? Was someone driving me to these appointments? The questions sounded clinical, but her eyes were doing something else entirely. She had watched that space beside me, session after session, stay empty while other patients had their people next to them, spouses, siblings, friends, somebody. Daniel Kerr had nobody. She never said anything directly. That wasn't her place, but I saw her see it. And that somehow was its own quiet kind of shame. Meanwhile, Vanessa had begun performing widowhood, not privately, publicly. She told people at our neighbor's dinner party that she was essentially doing this alone. She accepted sympathy with the practiced grace of someone who had rehearsed it in the mirror. She started referring to her schedule, her plans, her future, always singular, always hers, never ours. She had started erasing me, and I was still sleeping in our bed. It was a Friday afternoon in November when I found out exactly how far gone she already was. They sent me home early from a session. I had gotten used to doing everything myself. There was never anyone else, so I called a Lyft. The ride was quiet, too quiet for my liking, and I barely noticed the passing streets until we pulled into the driveway of my house in Highlands Ranch at 3:15 in the afternoon. I heard her before I even got the door open. Vanessa was in the kitchen on the phone, and she was laughing. Not a polite laugh, not a social laugh, but a real, loose, unguarded laugh. The kind I hadn't heard from her in months. The kind she used to laugh with me. I stood in the hallway of my own house with my jacket still on and my hospital bracelet still on my wrist. And I listened. Girl, I've basically been a widow for months already. Laughter. Fingers crossed it wraps up soon. More laughter. Grant and I are looking at moving in together. I just need a little more time. She wasn't whispering. She had stopped caring enough to whisper. I stood there, a man with cancer still moving through his blood. A man who had spent that morning being poked with needles. A man who had bought the heated blanket for this woman for 15 years. And I listened to my wife say those words. Fingers crossed it wraps up soon. About her husband with cancer. I did not walk into that kitchen. I did not call her name. I turned around. I went upstairs. I sat down on the bathroom floor with my back against the tub. And I stayed there for a long time. Not crying. Just breathing. Just letting the thing I had been refusing to know become something I now absolutely, completely, undeniably knew. My wife was not waiting to see if I survived. She was waiting for me to hurry up, and not. And somewhere during those minutes on that bathroom floor, with the cold tile underneath me and the Denver traffic humming faintly outside, Something inside me stopped breaking and started building. She had made her calculation. Now I was going to make mine. It got worse before I could act on that thought. Because of course it did. About 2 weeks later, I found out not from Vanessa. Not from anyone who had the decency to tell me directly. But from a quiet word a neighbor let slip that Vanessa had been telling people she was a widow. Present tense. While I was still alive. Still going to treatment. Still sleeping in our house. She had told people at a gathering that she was on her own now. That she was moving forward. She had already buried me in conversation. She just hadn't gotten around to telling me. And then, because apparently the universe wanted to make absolutely sure I had the full picture, I came home from a session one evening and found Grant sitting at my kitchen table. In my house. At my table. Eating what appeared to be my food. Vanessa stood by the kitchen counter with her arms folded and the expression of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment and was mildly irritated. It had taken this long to arrive. I want to describe that kitchen for a second. Because it matters. I had picked out that table myself. At a furniture store in Lone Tree. The year Piper was born. Because Vanessa wanted something long enough for the family we were planning to become. I had stood in front of it. Back when I still had the energy to stand in front of things without thinking about how many good years I had left. And pictured birthdays and homework and holidays around it. And there was a man I had never invited into my life sitting at the head of it. Using my fork. Daniel. She said. Not, I'm sorry. Not, let me explain. Just my name. Like a period at the end of a sentence she had already finished writing. You need to be realistic. You might not make it. I have to think about my future. Okay, I said. Grant was still seated. He had the decency to look at his plate. 1 point for Grant. I told him to get out of my house immediately. He came close. Looked at me. And told Vanessa. Call me when you're done. And I felt something move inside me. Not shatter. Not collapse. But shift. Like a gear that had been grinding. Finally clicking into the right position. I went upstairs. I got into bed. And while Vanessa stayed downstairs in the kitchen in the house I had built and paid for, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. And I made a decision so quiet it didn't make a sound. I was going to survive this cancer. And then I was going to make sure Vanessa didn't get a single thing she was counting on. This was not a woman waiting to see if her husband pulled through. This was a woman calculating the value of his death. And she was doing it while I was still very much alive. And as she was about to find out, very much paying attention. That night, I lay on the bathroom floor one more time. Not out of despair. Not this time. I lay there and I thought about everything I still had. My daughter. My sister Kyla. Who had been calling me every single day since the diagnosis and driving up from her place whenever I'd let her. My lawyer's number saved on my phone. My financial advisor who had known me for 12 years. A mind that still worked even when my body was fighting a war. Vanessa thought cancer had made me weak. She had fundamentally misunderstood what it had made me. It made me precise. Let me tell you what nobody tells you about fighting cancer while your wife is cheating on you. You have to choose every single morning which battle gets your energy. And I chose wrong for too long. I spent weeks grieving Vanessa when I should have been building. Lying in that bed after treatment. Nauseated and hollow. Replaying the phone call. Fingers crossed, it wraps up soon. Running it on a loop like a song you hate but can't get out of your head. Wasting the little energy I had on a woman who was out there spending my money and sleeping next to another man and telling her friends she was basically a widow. I was grieving someone who was still alive and completely unbothered. That had to stop. So I stopped. The hardest part of those weeks, harder than the treatment, harder than watching Vanessa disappear in real time, was not having Piper home. I called her every night at 7 without fail. Her grandmother would hand her the phone and she'd say, "Daddy," "Are you still sick?" And I'd say, "Getting better every day, baby." And she'd say, "Okay, because I made you a drawing every single night." A new drawing. One night, somewhere in the middle of December, she asked me something I was not prepared for. "Daddy, how come Mommy never calls me?" I held the phone and I looked at the ceiling and I said, "Mommy's been very busy, baby." Busy with what? I was speechless. I said, "Don't worry, baby. Mommy will call you soon." She accepted that the way 6-year-olds accept things completely and temporarily, and moved on to telling me about the drawing she had made that day. Days later, Kayla showed up at my place with 3 bags of groceries, a look on her face that could strip paint, and absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense. My little sister, 36 years old, the kind of woman who will hug you until you cry, and then hand you a lawyer's business card before you finish wiping your face. She'd driven up from Aurora the second I texted her, half a sentence, which was all it ever took with Kayla. She never needed the full picture before she showed up, only the outline. She walked into my kitchen, looked around, and turned to me with a very specific expression. "Danielle, where is she?" "Out." She nodded slowly, set the groceries down, started putting things away, and when she finally turned back around, her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, and she said, "Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm driving you to every session from now on, every single one, and you are going to eat something today, even if I have to sit here and watch every bite." And then she paused. "You're going to tell me what you need, and we are going to get it done. All of it. You hear me?" I nodded. "I saw something," I said to Kayla. I hadn't planned to say it. It just came out. Kayla turned around slowly. "What did you see?" Her phone. She left it on the counter face up. Text messages with Grant. And she told him the life insurance payout would be massive. That she doubted I'd beat it anyway. That they just needed to be patient. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Kayla put both hands flat on the counter. Breathed. "She said that while you're still yes." She turned around and faced the window above the sink for a long moment. When she turned back, her voice was completely different. Quieter. Slower. The way a person sounds when they are choosing every single word carefully because the alternative is saying something they can't take back. "Daniel," she said, "you need to call your lawyer. Not next week. This week. I already have an appointment," I said. And for the first time in months, my sister smiled. "Let me be honest about what those treatment weeks actually looked like. Because I want you to feel it. Not just hear it. The drive to Rocky Mountain Cancer Center took 50 minutes from Highlands Ranch on a good traffic day, which in Denver means it took anywhere between 50 minutes and the rest of your natural life. Kayla drove. Every time. She'd pick me up at 7:30 in the morning. She paid attention to what I needed. The sessions themselves lasted hours. I was always alone. No one was waiting for me. Except now Kayla was around. And I cannot tell you. I genuinely cannot find the words. What it meant to look over and see someone there. Just someone there. It sounds small. It was enormous. It was during one of those sessions that Dr. Patel asked Kayla to step into the corridor with her for a moment. I watched them through the glass. I couldn't hear anything. I saw Dr. Patel speak. I saw Kayla nod. I saw her face do something complicated and then go still. They were out there maybe 4 minutes. And then Kayla came back in and sat down and picked up her coffee cup and stared at it. "What did she say?" I asked. She took a breath. She said she stopped. Started again. She said you're one of the strongest people she's ever had in that chair. Just as a person. She said she's watched that chair next to you sit empty session after session. And she wanted me to know her voice caught. She wanted me to know that she sees it. What you've been carrying in here alone. I looked at the wall. I nodded once. And we sat there together in that room, and neither of us said another word for a long time. That is the moment right there when I understood that what Vanessa had done was not just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of the version of us that other people could see clearly, even when I was too close to it to name it. Dr. Patel had watched. She had kept her professional silence. But she had watched. The empty chair had told her everything, while Kayla drove me to Rocky Mountain Cancer Center during the weekdays. I called my lawyer on Saturday mornings. His name was Stephen Marsh. 25 years in family law. The kind of attorney who listens to everything you say and writes down only the things that matter. And then, at the end, looks at you over his glasses and says exactly what needs to happen next. I told Stephen everything. He listened. He wrote. And we got to work. Vanessa had no idea. She was too busy making plans to notice I was making mine. She had grown almost breathtakingly careless by this point, emboldened by my silence, convinced that I was too broken to fight back. She stopped hiding Grant entirely. She brought him around openly. One evening she walked past me in the hallway and said, almost as an aside, I deserve to be happy too. Daniel. I looked at her. Okay, I said. She took that as acceptance. She had no idea it was a receipt. She was so certain I still loved her enough to do nothing. That certainty was the most expensive mistake she ever made. The scan results were finally out. The critical one. The one that would tell us whether the treatment was working. Whether all of those mornings dragging myself out of bed had actually done anything. Vanessa was not there. She was away for the weekend with Grant. She had told me Thursday evening. Casually. So I went alone. I sat across from Dr. Patel in her office, and she slid the results across the desk, and she told me, in that calm, precise way of hers, that the treatment was working, that we were not out of the woods, but we were moving through them in the right direction. She said more after that. I know she did. I nodded in the right places. But inside I had gone completely still. I was going to survive. I drove back to Highlands Ranch alone. Parked in the driveway. Sat in the car for a full hour and just sat. Let it move through me. The relief. The grief. The anger. And somewhere underneath all of it, something that felt almost like gratitude. Not for what I'd been through. For what had become clear. I was going to make it. And when I did, I was going to make it without Vanessa. Not to win something, but because I had spent 15 years loving a woman who had looked at my situation and done the math on everything I owned. And I deserved better than that. Every man who has ever loved someone the way I loved her deserves better than that. Kayla called while I was still sitting in the driveway. I picked up on the first ring. Well, she said, it's working. I told her. The sound she made on the other end of that phone. I will carry that sound with me for the rest of my life. That night, I lay in bed in the house. Vanessa was already mentally redecorating. And I stared at the ceiling. And I felt something settle inside me. Not peace. Not yet. But something close to it. The quiet, solid feeling of a decision that has been made and will not be unmade. I was going to survive the cancer. I had already survived Vanessa. The paperwork was almost ready. It was almost time. Stephen Marsh had the divorce papers ready. I could have had them delivered clean, distant, professional. Stephen actually recommended it. I told him I'd handle it myself. Daniel, he started. Stephen, I said. I want to see her face. He paused. Then, and I'll never forget this, he smiled and said, all right. Then, call me after. I drove back to Highlands Ranch with the envelope on the passenger seat. I walked into my house one final time as Vanessa's husband. She was in the living room on the phone. Naturally, she looked up when I walked in with that particular expression she had developed over the last few months. The one that said my presence in my own home was a mild inconvenience. "We need to talk," I said. "I'm busy." "Daniel." "Vanessa." Something in my voice made her lower the phone. I held out the envelope. She looked at it, took it, opened it, read it. And then Vanessa did something I was not fully prepared for, even though I should have been. She laughed. Not nervously, not in shock. A genuine, relieved, full-throated laugh. The laugh of a woman who has been waiting for a bus that has finally arrived. "Finally," she said. The actual word. "Daniel, honestly, I've been wanting this since the diagnosis. Since the very beginning." She said it without thinking, without a single moment of awareness that she had just handed me a confession so complete that Stephen would later call it, and I am quoting my attorney here, a gift. She had never intended to stay. She had bet against me from day one. And she was still, right now, certain she was holding the winning hand. I looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," I said, "for being honest." And I walked out. Vanessa called her lawyer within the hour. Confident, almost cheerful. She had been waiting for this. 15 years of marriage in Colorado. The house. The joint assets. The accounts. She had done her own math. And she liked her numbers just fine. She told Grant that evening they were going to be fine. Better than fine. What Vanessa did not know, what she could not have known because she had never once taken me seriously enough to watch me carefully, was what Stephen and I had built over those quiet months. The proceedings told the whole story. The house she had been mentally redecorating for Grant, my separate property. Bought years before I ever met her. Never refinanced with her name on it. She had no claim to it. She just assumed she did. The joint accounts she had been spending freely for months. Separated. Repositioned. Every dollar accounted for and protected. The investments she had factored into her future. Gone from her name entirely. And somewhere in those proceedings, the full picture of Vanessa emerged. Not just the woman who had an affair, but the woman who had sat in her home while I was still in treatment, fighting for my life, and typed out a message to another man telling him the life insurance payout would be massive, that she doubted I'd beat it anyway, that they just needed to be patient. Some things don't need to be evidence to be devastating. And then there was Piper. Stephen laid out Vanessa's conduct with the quiet efficiency of a man who has seen everything and is no longer surprised by any of it. The judge asked Vanessa what parenting plan she proposed. Vanessa asked for every other weekend. The judge asked why not more. Vanessa said she needed time to build her new life. The judge, a man, said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "So granted. Primary custody to Mr. Care." There was a moment during that hearing I still think about. Stephen had entered the printed transcript of the text messages into evidence, the ones about the life insurance payout, and the judge read them silently at the bench for what felt like a full minute, while the courtroom sat in a silence so complete I could hear the air conditioning cycle on. He did not editorialize. He didn't have to. He simply set the pages down, looked at Vanessa over his glasses the same unhurried way Stephen looked at me over his, and moved on to the next exhibit. Sometimes the most damning reaction in a room is no reaction at all. Vanessa didn't fight it. She was already thinking about Grant. Vanessa's own choices. Documented, consistent, and completely voluntary. Had told the court everything it needed to know about her priorities. She had walked into this divorce certain she held every card. She was holding nothing. She had to tell Grant. And she did not tell him privately. She told him at dinner. At a restaurant in Denver they apparently went to regularly. Comfortable enough in their relationship to have a regular spot. And Grant listened to Vanessa explain that the house was gone. The accounts were not what she had described. The future she had painted for him had been built on money that was no longer hers. Denver is a big city with a surprisingly small social orbit when you've lived there long enough. Someone at a nearby table recognized her. Watched Grant's face go through its changes, the confusion, the calculation, the cold arithmetic of a man reassessing a situation in real time. Grant put his napkin down. So there's nothing, he said. Not a question. Grant, we can still, Vanessa. He said her name the same flat way I had said it in that living room. Like a period. There's nothing. He left her sitting there at the table. In the restaurant. In front of people who knew her name. With the bill, word travels fast in the social circles Vanessa had spent 15 years carefully cultivating. The dinner parties. The neighborhood gatherings. The friendships built around the lifestyle my income had provided. The same friends who had listened to her describe herself as essentially a widow. The same women who had nodded sympathetically while she performed her grief and talked about moving forward and said things like fingers crossed it wraps up soon, about a man who was still very much alive and paying attention. They heard about the restaurant. They heard about the assets. They heard about Piper and the sympathy that had been extended to poor Vanessa. The woman bravely soldiering through hardship while her sick husband clung on quietly, efficiently, and completely evaporated. Because it turned out Vanessa had not been a tragic figure bravely facing an impossible situation. She had been planning a hostile takeover of a dying man's life. And the man hadn't died. The calls slowed. Then stopped. The invitations disappeared. The social world Vanessa had curated so carefully closed its doors on her one by one. With the particular quiet efficiency of people who have decided, without announcement, that they are done. Vanessa had bet on my death and lost. And everyone knew it. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Stephen called. 2 words. It's done. Thank you. Stephen, I said. I hung up and I sat in that quiet for a long time. Not celebrating. Not replaying Vanessa's face. Not running the victory lap I think some people expected. Just sitting. Breathing. Feeling the particular lightness of a man who has set down something extraordinarily heavy and is only now remembering what it feels like to stand up straight. Vanessa walked out of 15 years with what she walked in with. Nothing she had planned for. Nothing she had calculated. Nothing she had laughed about on the phone on a Friday afternoon while her husband stood in the hallway with a hospital bracelet on his wrist. Nothing. She got Grant. And Grant, as it turned out, was not a long-term proposition either. He simply left. Because Grant had not signed up to start from scratch. He had been attracted to a lifestyle, a future, a payout that was never going to come. He had looked at Vanessa's actual situation and done his own math. His math said, this isn't worth it. So he went. Kayla told me over the phone. I could hear in her voice that she was waiting for me to celebrate. To say something satisfying. I thought about it for a second. Who? I said, that's it, Kayla. I stopped caring about Vanessa on a bathroom floor in November. Grant leaving her is her problem. I don't have Vanessa problems anymore. A pause. I really love you, my sister said. I know. I hung up and went back to what I was doing. That was the whole reaction. Not because I'm a saint, I am absolutely not a saint, but because the grief was genuinely gone. I had processed Vanessa while I was surviving her. By the time the punishment arrived, I had already moved on to living. That more than any legal victory, is the most satisfying thing I can tell you. She no longer had the power to make me feel anything at all. The final scan came back clean a few months later. Dr. Patel said the word remission, and I shook her hand and walked to my car and sat there for 20 minutes, just staring through the windshield at the Rocky Mountain Cancer Center parking structure. Remission. I had made it. Kayla threw dinner together that same evening. Her place. No planning. Just family appearing the way family does when the news is too big to sit with alone. Her husband Todd fired up the grill. The kids ran screaming through the backyard in the particular joyful chaos of children who have no idea how much the adults around them have been through and are simply glad everyone is there. I sat on Kayla's porch with a cold drink and I watched all of it. And I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I had almost forgotten what it was called. Peace. Real. Solid. Unperformed peace. Piper came and climbed onto the chair beside me after dinner. My daughter, 6 years old. The little girl who had asked me every night for months if Daddy was still sick, and somehow never once lost faith that I was coming back to her. She looked up at me with that serious face she gets, the one that means she has something important to say, and then she tucked herself against my side like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Within 10 minutes, she was asleep on my shoulder. My phone buzzed on the armrest. I looked at it. Vanessa's name. I looked at it for exactly as long as it took me to remember. I placed the phone face down on the armrest. Looked back at Piper, asleep on my shoulder. Looked out at the backyard, where Kayla was laughing at something Todd said. And the kids were still running. I had already grieved Vanessa months ago. On my bathroom floor in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. She was somewhere in the city tonight with nothing she planned for and no one she counted on. And I was here. Alive. Whole. Unbothered. Free. With my daughter asleep on my shoulder. I want to tell you what the year after all of this actually looked like. Because the courtroom win and the restaurant scene are the parts people want to hear. But they're not the parts that mattered most. What mattered most was smaller than that. It was Piper's first day of first grade, and me standing at the bus stop alone, and not feeling the absence of anyone beside me. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't performing a family that had already ended. It was Kayla and Todd showing up most Sundays with too much food. The way people do when they've decided a person is worth showing up for consistently instead of just in a crisis. It was Dr. Patel, at my last follow-up scan, telling me the numbers looked good and then, almost as an aside, saying she was glad to see someone finally sitting in the chair beside me. I was busy living,